Hey everybody, it's Rory from A&S Gear, and today we're going to learn how to do some general maintenance on your paintball markers. Okay, so we're looking at a 160R here. We're going to go ahead and take it apart, and we'll break it all the way down so you can see all the parts that are inside of it, and just look at things that you would want to look at for maintenance, or from a maintenance standpoint. So let's go ahead and get the barrel off. Get that out of the way. The only thing that you'll want to worry about on the barrel is the O-ring right here. Technically, you don't need this O-ring at the back. It does help with keeping the barrel from coming loose in the on the breech here. But this one, definitely I would make sure to have on there so that when the two pieces come together, that they do stay nice and solid together. And remember, Planet barrel, it's reverse threaded, so don't over tighten it or you'll probably won't get it off. All right. From here, we're going to just start breaking parts down. Really, the easiest way to work with this would be just to disassemble it, look at the parts, and then reassemble it. But we'll probably look at some of them as we go along. So first things first, let's just pull the bolt out right there. Let's get our grips off, because it's always easier to work on things with no grips on them. We'll get our regulator apart and we'll go from there. So let's do some wrenching for a minute. Pull it off of there. To the side. Get that over there. Get our battery out. Put that there. And then let's go ahead and separate our frame out. So unscrew our AT pipe. And once we get that to the point, we'll just rotate it up and out of the way, take it off. We'll open that thing up in a minute as well. I'm going to take the regulator off, and then I'm going to just put it back together quickly so that we can disassemble it at a later point. That's what it looks like without the grip on it. Right there. When we do our frame, we need to unplug two of the wire sets. There's 3 wire sets right here. We have our, go up to here so you guys can see it. We have, starting from my left right there, so that's our solenoid wire. The white and black set are our eye wires, and this red and black set at the bottom right here is our trigger switch wire. Because the board and trigger switch are part of the frame, to separate them, we do not need to disconnect it. So the only 2 we need to disconnect would be our solenoid right there, and then also our eye wires, because they are located in the top. They're attached to the frame, or to the body up there. So let's get that out. Now that we're unscrewed from our frame, notice how I was holding it together. I want to make sure that this doesn't fall as I'm unscrewing anything and potentially ruining our solenoid, pulling wires, breaking them. I'm always holding onto the frame and the body as a solid unit. And now that I'm disconnected from the board, my screws are out, I can let go and hold it with the other hand. Now as I pull down and bring this out, I'm going to be very careful that nothing gets pinched, nothing gets caught, and everything just slides out nice and easy. Like that. Never pull, never force, just bring it all out. All right, so from here, we'll leave this as a solid piece and we'll work on this as one unit when we get to it. And then we've got one unit here that we'll work on. So I guess we'll just start with the body. We'll start as I laid out the parts here. This O-ring always loves to fall off. So don't lose that. It's important that you have it on there. I mean, it'll probably work without it on there, but you don't want to lose it. We know it's there. It doesn't want to cooperate right now. So feed neck I'm not going to take off just because it's pretty self-explanatory how it comes off and what it does. So you just need to clean it. Just don't lose any of the parts. If for some reason, I don't think I've ever seen one leak, but there is a plug up here at the front that I guess could leak if you had air coming out from around this little plug right here. It is just screwed in, so it's not Loctited in or anything like that that you would see on a lot of other guns. You can just remove it, and it has an O-ring on the end of it right there, or I guess not in the end of it, in the middle of it, that you would just replace right there. I'm going to put that back in. And there's also one O-ring around this part as well. So if you get a leak from where these two pieces come together, check that O-ring right there as well. All right, so let's take off our eye covers. Put them to the side. I'll show you how the eyes come out. Detents also right in there. We can pop those things out. And then our eyes. Now the way this eye wire runs is along the bottom right here. Then it comes back to where it comes up to the port. You can see the port right up there. Through here, and then it splits. And it runs actually through the middle of the body right there, through a little passage to get to the other side right there. So what we need to do is feed everything out. So I'm going to take this side out first, and we'll talk about the red and the black side in a minute. And then I'm going to take this side out like that, and then I'm going to pull it out of here, so lift it up and out, and then I'm just going to slide it out through the little passage. Like that. And you can see how it's kind of shaped. One side is slightly longer than the other because that side needs to pass through all the way to the other side. Once we get those out, you'd want to clean these. Wipe down the inside of the eye, rub around there, and then clean the hole that the eye sits in. A lot of people will clean their eye off, but they don't clean out the hole that the eye sits in, and then it's still dirty inside there, so the eye still fault. They still read a problem because you're not actually cleaning out the house where the eye sits in. So make sure you clean the breech assembly, the whole breech area, not just the eye itself. Clean everything. Eyes are very important to have on there. And then our solenoid over here is just mounted up through these two screws. And then underneath our solenoid is two O-rings. There's one on here and there's one right here. There's two. And this O-ring is kind of shaped like a teardrop or a pear. This one is round, but they are just round O-rings. They are not specifically shaped in a particular way. They're just round. All you need to do is just take it and fit it into the groove, and it will form to the shape right there. One thing about the solenoid I'm going to tell you is on the original 160Rs when they came out, there was an issue with the solenoid. And I'll show you what that issue was right here. So one of the O-rings that they were using was too soft, and it would cause it to roll off if the solenoid got really warm or the gun got warm. That O-ring on the solenoid spool would be too soft, and it would actually roll off, and it would cause the solenoid to leak. So we're going to pull the solenoid spool out right now so I can show you what you would need to replace. All right, so I think I brought another screwdriver up here. I did. So I pulled the pilot valve off of there. Now I'm pulling this block, kind of like a manifold, off the other end of the spool here. And there is a little tiny O-ring on here. You don't want to lose any of these parts. You want to make sure you remember which direction you had these on here. Most of it is keyed, so you can't put it on the wrong way, but you never want to run into that problem down the line. So here's the solenoid block, and then the spool is inside here. You can push on it with an Allen key or your finger if you can get it to pop out far enough. Normally you can't, so I'm going to just push on it with my finger. And then you can see, here it is right here. So what was happening is the O-ring on the back side right here, which is that one right there, was coming off. And it was getting pinched inside this little housing right here, causing the spool to stick in the open position, and then the gun would just leak and bleed. And so they were replacing this O-ring with a harder version, and solved the problem. That's all it was. Very simple. Didn't happen to every gun, didn't happen all the time. It's just a problem that happened enough times where they needed to figure out a solution for it. And that was it. Simple, simple. The fix on it is super simple. And if you ever had that problem, or if you run into that problem in the future, that was the solution, and that is the solution right there. So let's go ahead and put this back together. We won't reinstall it yet. We'll just reassemble the solenoid real quick. Not parts I want to have just laying around. Too many tiny parts that you don't want to lose. And if you do have that problem, you can get that O-ring, the O-ring you need, from any authorized Planet Eclipse repair center. We have them here, or whatever you're closest to, you can get it there. Or we can send them to you too. If you need one, just give me a call, I'll send you an O-ring. All right, so that is our solenoid. And that is really the entire body right here. We've already pulled the bolt out, so there's nothing inside there that we need to worry about. There's no hidden O-rings or anything inside of there. That's it. That's your body. So let's go ahead and reassemble the body back to its original, I guess we got original state. We'll put the solenoid on. Solenoid goes with the pilot valve facing forward, not backwards like this where it's at the back. You definitely want it facing the front. All right, that's back on. Let's do our eyes. So, as a rule of thumb with all Planet Eclipse guns, the red eye, so we've got a red and a black, they are going to go on the right side. Red on the right. If you remember red on the right, or RR, or whatever it is, that will be the way it goes for Planet Eclipse guns. The black side, we're going to pass through to this side over here. Because my gun is upside down, this is the left side, even though this is my right hand. This is the left side of the gun, and this is the right side of the gun. So we're going to pass the eye through the passage in the body, so it comes out the other side, like so. And then we're just going to lay it in its groove for now. Even though that is where it sits, I might need to adjust it a little bit, so I'm just putting it in there as a placeholder right now so it doesn't flop around on me. I'm going to take my eye and I'm going to set it into its spot. Now every once in a while, especially if you're using a new set of eyes, they're not bent or shaped for the eye to sit perfectly in its spot, and sometimes it'll pop up, pop up, pop up. No matter what you do, it doesn't want to stay in that spot. It'll just kind of pop up and out of the way, especially if the eye has had any wear to it, or you've pulled it in and out a bunch of times. It won't want to sit there. If that happens, there's a way to kind of, I don't want to say fudge it, but a way to make sure that it does sit in place. Luckily this one is staying, but let's just say it kept popping up and it was sitting up like it is right now. It is not laying perfectly down in its groove. What I do is I make sure that it is above where it needs to be, that I've set it in there, and when I lift this up, if it pops up like that, what I will do is take my eye cover, which is this one right here, and I will start from the bottom and I will slide it up onto the cover this way, or onto the into its slot. That way I'm keeping the eyepiece or the eye emitter, whatever you want to call it, the eye block in place. I'm not letting it slide left or right, and I'm keeping it in the groove where it's going to drop into place. If I just, let me pull this off here again. If this is sticking up like this, and I just set this thing down on top and hope that it goes in the right spot, probably not the best choice. I could crush or crimp that wire. But if I put it in the right spot, it pops up, and I know that it was where it needed to be, and I come from the bottom up, I know that that's going to help ease that, that eye block into place, and it's not going to come out of its location. Now, if I push down on my eye cover right now, and it was not completely flat across the top and smooth on both edges, I would stop right there and I would reposition my eye again. Your eye cover should fit flush with the body. If it does not, something is in the way and there is a problem. Now I flip it over to the red side or the right side. I'm going to do the same thing. Put my eye cover or my ball detent in. Very important that you put your ball detents in there. Eye cover, and put it together. All right, back together. Now this right here, this piece of heat shrink tubing that's on here is important to have, okay? What it does is it fills the gap that the eye sits in so that the eyes stay snug and close to the body. If you cut this eye, this shrink wrap off and just left the wires floating around in there, there's a good chance that they would not want to sit in this groove and they would kind of just go wherever they want to go. And when you go to put the body and frame together, you'll crush these wires. So it's not some accident that that tube is on there. It's not an accident that it is loose. It should not be tight against the wiring. It works as a gap filler to make sure that those wires stay nice and neat and in position. Now this is going to run to the back, and this is a perfect setup right here for when we go to reassemble. So we'll move that over. Next we'll move over to the frame. So the frame, pretty simple also to take apart. This O-ring that I kept having trouble with earlier, it just sits right back up in here, and it works as kind of like a cushion for when the frame and the body come together, so that when you tighten everything down, it's not just crushing against each other. So it is important to have it in there. It would probably work without it, but put it in there. Don't lose it. It's going to fall out as we're working here, so I'm just going to set it to the side. All right, so first thing, let's take our trigger out. First thing we need to do is get the, my brain stopped working, these set screws, or these trigger screws out. Let's do that one, and let's do this one. That releases our spring off of there, but our trigger's still in here. The trigger needs to come out from this pin here. Unscrew that, set that there, and then our trigger can come up through the top. Now the trigger on a 160R is the same trigger setup that is on a 1.5, so you can remove and replace this trigger shoe here with the flat style. To do that, there's a screw on the back side right here. You would undo it like that, and then the shoe comes right off and you replace it with the flat one. We'll put it back together for now though. It's actually not necessary to take the whole gun apart to take the shoe off the trigger. When it's sitting inside there, like so, you can actually get to it. If you took the grips off, you can get to it this way and undo the screw, pop the shoe off, put the new shoe on, and then tighten this down. It can be a little tricky if you've never done it before, so the easiest way, if you're not comfortable with doing that, is to take the entire trigger out, but it is not necessary. All right, so let's get the rest of the gun apart. Let's take the board out. There might be a reason for you to take the board out. Maybe somehow got a bunch of paint in it. Not always necessary. I'm going to leave the micro switch attached to the board when I take it out. So I'm just going to unscrew the switch from the frame. I'm going to leave it attached though. Right there, you can see that it's there. I'm not going to take it out of there. Once that's done, I can just slide the board up. Now I'm pushing on the board from the opposite side with my finger. So I'm pushing on it from down here, and I'm pushing up. And I'm watching the board as it's coming out. I'm making sure that it's not bending or pitching or getting caught on anything. And I'm going to pull it right up and out, and there we have it. So here's our board, our micro switch right here, our battery harness down here, and our OLED screen right here. And this is just on some pin connectors, so you can pop that off, just like that. Does need to stay together, so we'll just put it back together like that. We'll set that to the side. From here, if you needed to take this part off, it's set on there with a sticky backing. So you'd have to push it off from this side, like taking an Allen key or something, and actually putting it inside here and pushing this whole thing off and pressing it out. No reason for you to do that, so don't. But that's how you would do it if you needed to. If you want to take the ASA off the bottom, maybe you had an ASA leak down there, it's leaking from the bottom down here, or it's leaking from in between the two right here. This is where you would need to look at. So there are two holes in your ASA at the bottom, here and here. Okay. If you're leaking from this back hole right here, it's the tank O-ring. If you're leaking from right here, it is typically the core O-ring. And if for some reason it's leaking out the front here, then you would want to look at this O-ring on here. So on your on-off wheel, there's an O-ring right there. That would be the one to look at. And again, if you are, got a bunch of pieces here I don't want to lose. If you're leaking from the front, check that. If you're leaking from the middle, you are going to look at these O-rings that are here. You've got one on the outside right there, and you've also got one on the bottom down here as well. So at the face and right there, you check those O-rings. That's all that's inside there. And then at the back hole, if that's leaking, that's the tank O-ring. Let's go and put this back together. And then there's one more gasket on the bottom, which is right here, which has a gasket and it has a filter. And that's the connection between the frame and the ASA. And this just comes out right here. And they are two separate pieces. So we've got our filter right there, and we've got our gasket right there. Now the gasket does have a ridge around the middle of it, and that might be kind of hard to see on there. But the ridge is not in the center of the gasket. It is offset to one side or the other. When you go to put this together, you have one side of the hole where the gasket sits is shallow, and that's on the frame side. And then one side of the hole is much deeper, which is on the ASA side. You want to put the ribbed side or the ridge side into the deeper section. So it's going to go into the ASA section down here, like that. We're going to take our filter, just drop it right in the middle, right there, and then we're going to put it back together, like that. Very, very simple. It's a nice thing about it. It's not hard to understand what's going on in there, so it's easy to maintain. All right, so that's that. Let's go ahead and put our board back in. So as we set our board down, we want to make sure that we have this rubber piece at the top of our board, which is going to fit into a particular spot on the frame. And then we are going to just line everything up and slide it in. As we slide it down in, we want to make sure that it doesn't get hooked up anywhere, that it doesn't get stuck anywhere, that we aren't forcing it anywhere. You should be able to just slide it down and it fits nice and flush inside there. The one side isn't sticking up or anything like that. It fits evenly across the entire frame. We'll drop our micro switch in. Tighten that down. Again, the micro switch, definitely don't want to over tighten that. You just give it enough to hold it in place. Just a tiny bit of a snug, and that's it. You don't want to crush that micro switch and break that plastic housing right there, and your gun's not going to work. Let's put our trigger back in. Line up the hole for the trigger pin, slide that through, and tighten that down until it's snug. Make sure that it moves freely. Nothing worse than putting it all back together and realize that you've bound up that trigger somehow, and then you got to take it all back apart again. Check it in steps as you go along. Put our trigger spring back in, a little bit of a tighten. All good. And then we're going to make sure that we don't lose that. And it'll probably fall out as I'm sitting here again, but I like to keep all my parts together. All right, let's move to this AT pipe real quick. This just has 3 O-rings on it. O-ring at the end, O-ring at the end, and if I thread this far enough off, this whole piece comes off, and O-ring in the middle. So if this is leaking for some reason, check O-ring, O-ring, O-ring. They're all the same size. Regulator, let's move on to that. So to disassemble our reg, we're going to take the bottom off, the swivel off, and then we're going to get the insides out. Now we have a piston and a spring, which did itself a favor and popped out for me. But if it's not, it'll be stuck in there like that. Typically just a little tap on your hand will get that to come out. Spring and piston. Check that O-ring on the bottom of the piston right there. If you have a leak coming from the side of the regulator right there, you can see that hole. Most of the time, it's this O-ring on the piston right here. There could be a couple other issues down in the regulator, but a majority of the time, it's going to be that O-ring right there. So switch that one out. For the rest of this, you'll come from the bottom. You're going to screw it into the regulator. It will not come out this way from the bottom. You screw it in to the point where it comes apart and pops down, and that's it. Everything is empty on the inside there. You've got a couple O-rings on the outside, there and there. That's what seals up the swivel. So if you have a leak coming from the swivel area, check the 2 O-rings on the swivel. And then we'll get into the actual regulator assembly right here. So there's a couple O-rings in here that you definitely want to look, well, all of them in the reg adjuster here, you want to keep track of here and here, and then inside as well. So the easiest way if you can't unscrew this by hand, which I would not imagine that anybody could, easiest way to do this, put your Allen key in the bottom, take another Allen key, you're going to put it through the holes on here, and you're just going to turn it and pop it apart. This should not be so tight that you really have to struggle to get this apart. We don't want to damage this in any way. We just want to open it up. So when you go to reassemble this, all you want to do is go to where it's tight and basically to where it stops and just barely give it a little bit more and then leave it alone. Never want to over tighten it. We're going to pull that off here. Now there's 2 sections to this. Let's talk about the brass top first. Down inside here, in there, you can actually see it. there's a black O-ring that's down inside of there. When the piston comes through here, it seals around that O-ring on the inside. If that O-ring is bad and it can cause pressure to get up through and into this section, it can bleed out that side hole that we talked about on here also. So check that O-ring on the inside of the brass piece. And then also our reg seat. Now our reg seat, let's see if I can get it out of there. Sometimes I can grab it and pull it out. I don't want to damage it in any way because I don't want to have to replace it. But these can go bad over time. They will. There's a couple things you can do here. See, I'm starting to wiggle it out and it's coming out. Just kind of grabbing it by the edge, wiggling it up. All right, so we pulled that out. This is our reg seat right here, and then we have a purge valve here also. So it's very important to have this in here. This needs to sit in the bottom of our fitting. You got our spring and our valve right there. Well, it kind of looks like a post. That sits down in there, and then our reg seat. There's a hole in the middle of our reg seat. It goes around the purge valve and goes onto there. Now, if for some reason the face of this, the top side right here, is damaged or cracked or chipped, it can cause the regulator to have some problems, to overcharge, supercharge, not recharge quickly. A lot of issues that you can run into with it, and you need to replace it. Now, if it just shows a little bit of wear on the top, you can just flip it over and use the other side. Now, I don't recommend doing that and then just assuming that that's going to be good for another however long it took you to break it the first time. In a pinch, it's good. It'll work for you. In the long run, just replace the reg seat completely. It is not worth having it go bad on you again while you're playing. So just replace it. They're not expensive. So let's just put that back in there like that. And that, once the piston goes through this brass piece, it actually pushes against this reg seat like this. And the way that these reg seats typically get damaged is people over tightening this right here. So when this is together, like this, let me just give this a little bit of a snug here, a little snuggie. This is what it looks like when it's inside of the reg assembly, inside here, okay? So it looks like that. When you turn the bottom with your Allen key down here, like this part is threaded so it moves along the inside of the reg body. When you turn it clockwise or in, this goes up this way, getting closer to the piston, which is going to reduce pressure. So the piston, head of the piston right here is going to grind against the reg seat. And if you just keep cranking this and force this up against it, there's a possibility that you can damage it. This will just dig in to the piston reg seat. I guess not the piston reg seat, the reg seat. And it can damage it. And that's typically the way they get ruined. So be careful with that. Also, another thing I've seen, not in the 160, but I have seen in the ETHA 2s, I believe. If you turn this one in hard enough, the spring will actually get stuck around the brass part of the adjuster, and then the regulator stops working properly too, because you're just adjusting it too far. It's not meant to do that. You're just forcing it up inside of there. So never overdo it. When you're screwing these into lower velocity or trying to zero your reg, you just go until you feel that pressure of the reg bottoming up against the piston, and you leave it alone. Tightening it does not make it work better or make it regulate better. It just doesn't need to be. So there we go. We're gonna put it back together, drop it through the top here. I'm gonna push on it with my finger so that I'm pushing the threads against the bottom. And I'm going to bring it all the way down to the completely out position. Okay, right now, if I was to put the regulator back together and not touch anything and put it back on the gun, we would be over pressurizing the gun. This would be in the fully as much pressure as possible position, which would be pretty seriously bad for the solenoid and the gun itself. So we want to bring it all the way out, we're going to reassemble our regulator. All right, so we've got that. This I'm not going to put on because we have to take it off to get it onto the gun. And then I'm going to set this according to the manual from the completely out position, so all the way out like it is right now. You go 4 turns in from all the way out. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is the factory position right here. It should roughly get us a velocity of about 280, 275, 280 feet per second, but then you'll need to adjust it to whatever field limits you're playing on or whatever paint you're using. If you're using the stock barrel in a really small paintball, your velocity might drop a lot. You might be at 260. So you might need to increase this a little bit to get that 280 feet per second. So this is just a general setting. It is not the end-all be-all of settings of where the reg needs to be. So 4 turns in from all the way out is the setting for the 160R regulator. All right. And then last here would be our engine, our gamma core engine. So this is, again, it has a couple parts to it, but it's not hard in any way to figure out. We're going to break it all the way down. So taking the back cap off is not something you need to do, but I'm going to do it just to show you what's inside there in case you ever did need to take it apart. So we're going to take the back cap off, and that's really it. The only reason you would ever need to take the back cap off is if you needed to remove this for some reason. Maybe it's getting stuck or it doesn't want to slide up and down or something like that, and you needed to actually get this piece out, you would need to pull the back cap off. Other than that, you don't need to take it off of there. So yeah, that's that. Front's going to unscrew. It's going to come right off. Now the front is, consists of 2 pieces right there. So you've got a couple O-rings on here, so here, inside here. And very important O-ring, probably in the whole thing, the outer bolt O-ring right there, and then the inner can O-ring on the inside there. Those are super important for this kind of setup right there. If you're doing bolt maintenance or you have a leaky bolt, I would just recommend changing every O-ring on the bolt. Start fresh. It's really the easiest way to do it. I mean, you can troubleshoot it and go like, oh, I'm just going to change that one O-ring, but if you change that one O-ring and it's not the problem, then the original O-ring on there probably wasn't a problem and it is a good O-ring, and you're just wasting O-rings. So just replace them all and start fresh. Just words to live by. Now this front piece will unscrew off as well. My hands are super greasy, so I might not be able to get it. Oh, I did get it. This comes off here. Now we have a spring and a spring guide. We have a rod there, and this here. These go together. O-ring, O-ring, important right there. There aren't any on the inside of this section here. So check O-rings, O-rings, O-rings. You always want to just check them all. Back there, those are important too. And then we've got our switch at the back. We can pull this out. Right there. And then we've got that piece and this piece. So when this is assembled inside all these parts, you've got this and this together, which pushes up against this. You've got this and this together. So this spring does 2 things. Well, it does a couple things actually. But it holds this backwards when it needs to be back, which holds the plunger against the pin right here, which keeps your bolt locked in place. It also helps the stem move forward to seal the valve so you get better efficiency, or seal the bolt. So it does a bunch of different things. So it is important to be in there. So you definitely don't want to lose that. And this stem that is here also keeps the spring from being able to bend all wonky like. So it's a spring guide in essence right there. Helps push that back together. So that's what your bolt looks like. That goes like this, and this is in here like that. So that's what it looks like assembled. There's a lot of O-rings on there, but it's a super, super efficient and super robust system. These gamut cores, I don't see many problems with them ever. So if you do have an issue with it, change all the O-rings out, because it can, like I said, it can be very hard to pinpoint and troubleshoot each individual spot in there. So just replace them all. They're pretty standard O-rings. When we go to put it together, it is important that we put the pin and cap back together. If you can see on the bolt right here, it's kind of hard to see because my shirt is black, but you can see that there is a gap, or not a gap, but the bolt has a cutout section at the top right here, and is flush with the bottom right here. I guess I can show you on this one right here. See the cutout right there, and it's flush on this side, cut on this side. The flush section sits at the bottom of the body, like that. Bloop. So why I'm telling you that's important is the section of the pin that locks the bolt into the body needs to be at the bottom, the flush section. The threaded section, which threads into the cap, needs to be at the top section, which is the notched or cut section. So it goes in like that. So we're going to put it in there like that now. And then we're going to drop the plunger in and make sure that it lines up properly down in there. And once I push on it and push it down into place, this is less likely to fall out. I can actually feel it clicking, but it will not hold in place until this section comes in and forces it down. So I'm going to take my switch, I'm going to push that down in there. Now this is a little bit more rigid in the bottom. And I'm going to take this assembly right here, and I'm going to push that down in there. Remember, spring and guide pin must be there. Guide pin side goes towards the back of the bolt, non-guide pin side goes towards the front of the bolt, like that. I'm going to push that up in there. And seems to be fitting perfectly. I'm going to take my front can, which has these two sections, and I'm going to put it together. Screw that in all the way down until it stops. If your hands are greasy, wipe them off, because you want to feel that point where the two pieces come together and then they stop. You don't want to screw it in some way and you're like, oh, that sounds good enough, or that feels right. But it's not all the way together. You will get a leak. Then take this, thread that the rest of the way on, and then we can go ahead and assemble our cap. We're going to check this to make sure that it snaps up and down like it should, and that our Allen key side is at the bottom right there. So we're going to pop that up. We're going to screw in our cap. And then make sure that it works. Perfect. So now we're done. We can go ahead and put it all back together. So first things first, get our frame on. A couple things with putting the frame on. The wiring does not run through the same hole. The front eye wires and the solenoid wire run through two different spots. If we look at this frame right here, you can see that there is a divider right there. The front hole right here, your eye wires, that's the back one. I can't tell because I'm trying to look at this backwards. No, I was right. This one right here. The front one is where your eye wires are going to go through. The back one is where your solenoid wires are going to go through. If you try to run the eye wires up over the top of the divider and then down, you will ruin them. So don't do that. So let's make sure that, O-ring again, that our eye wire goes through the front hole, solenoid goes through the back. I'm going to pull my wiring for my solenoid up and around so that it is out and not getting pinched. Before I close this down, I'm going to put that darn O-ring back in there. If you took a little bit of grease, I don't have any with me right now, put it on that O-ring and then set it into that frame. It would not want to pop out all the time. I'm going to set it down on there. I'm going to check one last time before I tighten everything down that my wires are in the right spot, that the frame and body went easily together. They are sitting flush together. They're not a gap or anything in there, and nothing's caught in the way. You don't want to tighten these screws down with a gap or something, or with a wire in the way, because you're going to ruin that wire. I'm going to put that on just till I feel it snug. Put this one on just till it goes to the bottom and stops. I'll go back, little tighten, little tighten. Check my trigger, make sure that's functioning right. Then I can go ahead and plug everything back in. Solenoid and eyes. Make sure my wiring is tucked neatly out of the way, that it's not getting caught on anything. Flip it over. Battery. Drop my battery in, check my battery wires to make sure they are not getting caught on anything and they are not crushed or crimped. I can put my grips on. The reason really I put my grips on right at this point, you could put them on later, but I'm going to be moving the gun around a little bit still, and my battery could potentially fall out. And if I'm holding the gun up in the air, if I'm working on it and moving it around, doing something like this, and the battery falls out, it's going to yank on that battery harness wire, and I just don't want to do that. I don't want to run that possibility of ruining that wire or the port on the board or anything like that. So if I put the grips on, that battery can't go anywhere, and it's less problematic, I guess. Reg body, put that on. Now remember, we've already set the reg, so we don't need to mess around with the velocity on it or the adjustment of the velocity at this point. We would go to the chronograph, shoot the gun, and see where we end up. Now the swivel goes on here, but if you put it on now, you won't get your grip cover on. So grip cover first, fold that up and around, take our swivel, don't put it on upside down, put that all the way up, take our bottom cap, put that on, finger tight, and then wrap the grip cap around the bottom, or the grip around there. Now I'm going to rotate this up like that. You can see I just rotated it up. Take my pipe, I'm going to put it in there. Now on the AT pipe, there's the long side and the short side. The short side goes towards the frame, the long side goes towards the swivel. So I've got my swivel facing up, I've got my AT pipe screwed all the way together as small as it can be. I'm going to put it in one side like that, I'm going to rotate it down, and then I'm going to expand it. So I'm going to turn them in opposite directions of each other until it is tight, like that. I also want to make sure that my swivel is in line. It is possible to screw these together and have that swivel be slightly off center, and I've seen that cause these to leak every once in a while. So just make sure that it is centered well on there. Then take our bolt, slide it in, make sure that our cap is in the up position, slide it all the way in, and lock it down. And there we go. Complete breakdown and maintenance for a 160R. Well guys, I hope this helps you out with any questions or concerns you have about your paintball gear or products. And as always, for all your paintball needs, shop ansgear.com.